So in order to answer this question, we got to go into a little bit of history, and that is that Adam Smith was a really smart guy, and he understood fiat currency, and he also understood hard currencies. In the U.S. at the time, and I don't know exactly when he made that statement, but most people back then understood that hard currency was always going to be preferable to a fiat currency, or to a currency that was supposedly backed by something, even though it really wasn't backed by something. It was just being printed and being accepted in the marketplace. Because, well, how do you engage in commerce if all the money is being absorbed to pay for a war? All the real money is being absorbed to pay for all your soldiers. Rome ran into this. Like, every country runs into this. On a long enough timeline, every single country will run into this problem. They either pay for a war or a disaster, or something happens with money they don't have, and somehow there's going to be interest involved, because usury is still very much a thing. It's still alive and well, and that creates all these problems. So we have to kind of look at some context here. This would be true. Smith's statements would be true in a hard money economy, meaning that there was no counterfeiting. Then yes, what happened is that as your competition grows and more people are in that particular space, so I don't know, you're a bootmaker. Okay, I'm just pulling something random here. You're a bootmaker, and as more and more people become bootmakers in a fixed money economy, yeah, your prices are going to start going down, because your competition is going to start lowering their prices, and your quality is going to end up going up. Now, here's the thing that isn't talked about, and this is talked about in his later stuff, I think everybody else pretty much forgets this. At least every university student I've ever run into completely forgets this, that there is a threshold of price down, quality up. At a certain point, the people who are really good at it say, okay, I can't make any money anymore doing this, so I'm just going to stop. And so then your quality starts to get dragged down, because the others who are just competing solely on price, we're seeing this everywhere right now. This is ubiquitous. This is all over the U.S. Every company is trying to drive prices down. That's why they're importing people from the third world. That's why they don't care what's going on in the semi-truck world. That's why they're doing everything. They're pressing all of the quality everywhere in the supply chain down to try and drag these prices down. But the quality is going so far. It's almost not worth buying most things now. That's kind of the problem. And so because there's a threshold. Well, there is no threshold if you have money printing. If you're one of the chosen, right? You're one of the chosen companies. Then you get the money printer that just prints a bunch of money and gives you these low interest loans, or lower interest loans than what everybody else is paying in the marketplace. This will keep you alive a little longer, and it'll let you drag your prices down. And it turns into this black hole of, yeah, your dollar price may be going down, but the quality of the product is horrible, right? So, and like right now though, we have the opposite. We have prices going up and the quality's going down too. So it's like you have the worst possible scenario kind of playing out. And I'm not over talking this. Remember, keep in mind, Adam Smith's book's like that thick. So like, I'm having to condense a lot of stuff here. But there's a threshold. And this is where you get Ayn Rand's book, the John Gall. I just had the name of the book, and John Gall book. Okay, anyway, I know I'm going to get skewered in the comments. Just fine, whatever. I don't care. Ratio me. What happens is that the people who are good at stuff stop doing it. This is why you're really good truck drivers, for example. A lot of them are either retiring or they're semi-retiring. Pun not intended. They're taking loads kind of randomly. They're not out doing it professionally anymore on an ongoing basis, because they can't justify all of the costs to do it, because that threshold is getting breached, so it pushes everything down. I'm hoping that's making sense. Okay, so let's use a hard money economy. Once that threshold is reached, where it's like the price can only go so low because your costs can only go so low. You start bumping against that, your margins get too thin. And if you try to do the thing where you buy the market, okay, and I've seen companies do this. I've seen lots of competitors do this. I have lots of competitors who have done this to themselves. They volume themselves right out of business. They start off great. They're moving a lot of metal. They're doing a lot of stuff. They're doing a ton of work, and they're bidding everything. So I'm like, I'm not touching it. You go right ahead and take it for that price. And they go out of business very quickly, usually, because they go too far below that threshold. They start thinking with that logic of, oh, I'll just do the Costco thing. Yeah, that doesn't always work. The reason why most of these big firms like your Costco's and Amazon's, etc., they are being heavily subsidized with the stock market. That mechanism works like this. They convince a bunch of politicians who are stupid and greedy, which is the worst possible combination you could ever vote for, and say, hey, create a bunch of laws, tax laws that are favorable to people to put their money in the stock market instead of saving their money, for an investment, right? And then we'll give them these fake returns on paper, right? Because that's how this always works. It's never real returns. It's always fake. It's always on paper. So this is the way of things. So that money from the stock market goes in and starts feeding these companies that had no business having that kind of money available to, again, go below that threshold. So there's that stack them deep, sell them cheap kind of thing. They really didn't have any way to do that. In a hard money economy, you would have no way of doing that. You'd go bankrupt very quickly. So that threshold is what you're missing. So in a vacuum, yes, Smith is correct. That is your so-called invisible hand of capitalism, if you want to call it that. I think that's what he called it, or something like that. Invisible hand of the market, or the capitalism, or something like that. Anyway, yeah, but that's assuming hard money. That's assuming that you can't just do some kind of clever gimmick. And of course, in the old days, let me go ahead and define the old days. That would be the 90s. Okay, the 80s or the 90s. In the old days, if your business did that and you were publicly traded on Wall Street, you just went out of business and your business lost a bunch of money. But because the government is voted for largely at the time by this giant block of voters called boomers, they didn't want to lose any money. So now it's bailout investors, gamblers. That's exactly what it is. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Investors understand the risk of stock ownership, and they can and do lose money. Says it in every single form you've ever signed with a brokerage. Every one of them. Every one of them. Usually it's in bold, underlined, italicized, all caps. It says something like that. Like, dude, you fully understand that you could lose all of this money. But it's not politically popular for a bunch of boomers to lose all their money and then have to try and sell their houses. And if they sell their houses, they got to sell them for cash price, which is $10,000. That's not a joke, because it becomes what's called, it becomes price discovery. And if you start seeing houses sell for $10,000, like nice houses sell for $10,000 in reasonable neighborhoods, well, then all those banks who just lent out $500,000 to $2 million on these ridiculous, stupid 322 shit boxes. Yeah, now they have to try and look at their balance sheet and go, dude, yeah. I mean, this is the problem. This is that moral hazard that you get when you start bailing things out. Again, this is in 2008. You can go back and watch. I mean, Hank Paulson made this great case where you got to bail everything out, man. It's going to collapse the economy. No, it's going to collapse you and a handful of people out there who have got themselves into a liquidity trap. You did that to yourselves. The American people didn't do that to you. The borrowers didn't do that to you. Predatory lending, dude, you did that to you. And it's just because there's no way to pay any of this back. So anyway, from the Smithsonian reasoning, in a vacuum, yes, he's right, in a hard money economy. I don't think that Smith envisioned quite this level of international counterfeiting of a world reserve currency.